Hi, my name is John Struckle. I am a senior at Jesuit High School in Dallas, Texas. My grandfather, Bill Maney, is 82 years old. He is an amazing man in many ways. He is also a proud Korean War veteran. Many label Korea the Forgotten War, and many veterans feel that they were never properly acknowledged for their efforts in the Korean War. They came home without much of a welcome or thank you. My grandfather is different. He made his experience in Korea and the U.S. Army part of his everyday life. My mother and her sisters talk about how he spoke with them about Korea as they were growing up. The family slideshows, which include his slides from Korea, were part of that. The pictures and ribbons and stories he has shared with me fostered my desire to serve my country through a military career. I enjoy history and have researched the war and the impact of continued oppression in North Korea. The Korean War stopped the spread of communism. We stopped the North Koreans from taking over South Korea. This has enabled a prosperous and dynamic South Korea with some of the largest and fastest growing companies in the world like Samsung, LG, and Hyundai. That could not have happened if we had let North Korea, aided by China, take over South Korea. I interviewed my grandfather over the Thanksgiving holiday and helped him organize and narrate his slideshow. I learned a lot. We created his page for the Wall of Honor in the Korean War National Museum. I encourage each of you to talk with your grandfathers who served in Korea and to honor them with their own page on the Wall of Honor and their own video interview. The Korean War National Museum has a temporary location in Illinois, and with your help, we'll eventually build a permanent museum in New York City where the largest veteran population resides.
My name is Bill Maney. I'm 82 years old, and I proudly served in the United States Army as a second and later first lieutenant in the Combat Engineer Battalion attached to the 2nd Infantry Division during the Korean War. Today I live on the water at Carolina Beach, North Carolina, with my wife Shirley. I've spent my time with my family, including my 3 daughters and the 6 grandchildren, when we can all get together. I work crossword puzzles to keep my brain good, and I go to the gym regularly to keep my body going. My grandson has asked me to tell my story about the Korean War, and he's helped me complete both the video interview and the slideshow.
Papa Bill, how did you end up in the military to begin with?
It all began back when I was in high school and was selected to be our school's representative at Old Dominion Boys State, where we learned how the state government operated. And that year they had Boys State at Virginia Tech, which in those days was called VPI. I liked what I saw there on the campus during that week and decided to go ahead and make application and go there to college. Incoming freshman in the late 40s, and I guess that's not the case now, but incoming freshmen were required to be in the military for 2 years. And so that's what I had to do. And it was okay. I learned, and the discipline was good for me. I graduated in 1952 with a degree in mechanical engineering and a commission as a 2nd lieutenant in the United States Army Corps of Engineers. I started civilian work at DuPont in Seaford, Delaware, while I was waiting for orders to go on active duty in the military. I got a telegram assigning me to a different post, and I took the communication as being relieving me of the responsibility to have to go on active duty at that time. But it wasn't long when that misunderstanding was corrected, and I was required to go ahead and go on active duty. And I did so at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, which was the headquarters of the Corps of Engineers. During that time, after finishing school and before going to Korea, I met my wife Shirley, and we were married. So when it came time to leave, I was apprehensive, not too much about the war, because at that time the truce had just, or was just going to be signed. But I was reluctant to leave a new wife for a year.
What was your actual job in the Army and over in Korea?
I was assigned to the 2nd Engineer Battalion, 2nd Infantry Division, right after the truce was signed. The division responsibility was defend the area which was roughly the center of Korea, above the 38th parallel, just south of the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. Our job as engineers was to maintain roads and bridges in the division area and the engineer equipment that was assigned to the infantry units, bulldozers and generators. As engineers, we scrounged a few niceties, if you want to call it that. We got wood from someplace and put tent floors in our tents, and after we were there a while, we scrounged materials and built a makeshift shower point where we could actually take a shower. And we also scrounged a generator from someplace. And so the main buildings on our battalion headquarters had electricity, and we ran a line into our officers' tents. So we had one single light bulb in there rather than candles, and so we could see each other and play bridge and that kind of thing. We had an officer's mess, which was a Quonset hut, but we made it pretty classy. And we had a fireplace in there and a bar. And later, when our battalion, as part of the division, moved south to the rear area, we had a larger officers' mess, and we built a bar in there. And I claim to be the longest bar in Korea. It's about 50 feet long. And we built it with plywood and 2x4, and we actually smoothed off the edges of the plywood around the top of the bar, and then we stained it with cordovan shoe polish, and it looked pretty classy. Like the general came over there and had dinner with us one time, General Seitz, and he thought we had a nice operation. And we had a enlisted man, Sergeant Constantine C. Catacasinos from New York, and his family was in the deli or bar business in New York. And he was a real character and talked a lot, could make some fancy drinks, even though we were in a war zone.
What was it like living over there?
After the truce was signed, life in Korea, once we got used to it, wasn't all that bad. We were, about 30, 40 miles north of Seoul, in what technically is North Korea, and there weren't any civilians within 20 miles or so of where we were. And we were eating GI food, line food, so I think they were bee rations, and we had powdered eggs and canned vegetables and canned meats. We had, with stews and beans and all that kind of stuff. Chipped beef on toast was served about 3 times a week, and I have not eaten any of that since whatever it was, 60 years ago. And we used to call it the SOS, or shit on a shingle. Did I have any fresh foods or vegetables for a year? except when I was in Japan at school for part of a week and on R&R once. I guess I think the things that I missed most was fresh milk and steak and tomatoes. I remember coming home on the ship, on the troop ship, coming home, we had all those, and I couldn't get my fill. The weather was, a lot different than it is here for periods of time. Other times it was not too bad, but in the wintertime it got really cold. And I remember there was a period of some weeks where in the daytime it never got above freezing. And we lived in a squad tent. There was I can't remember, there was 6 or 8 of us in that tent, 6 I think. And we had a little pot stove in the center of the tent that was in a little sandbox. And it was an insulated hole in the ceiling for the chimney, the metal chimney to go out. And we had mountain sleeping bags and liners, and we had cold weather gear. So we really didn't get cold physically, except for our face, and we even had knit things that covered everything up except our eyes and nose and mouth. But one of the things that I remember about living in that tent, we would get in, I would put 2 or 3 layers of clothing on at night, get in that sleeping bag and zip the outer layer up, and then the case, and then I'd zip the inner layer up, and then we would do everything in our power to flip up and flip over. And so the zipper was on the bottom, so there wouldn't be any leaks. And so it'd be pretty comfortable in that little cocoon. But even at that, we'd wake up in the morning and the inside of the tent was covered with frost from what little bit of breath we got out. And by morning, the stove would be pretty well down to 0, but that was an interesting thing too. Then the other thing was in the summertime, it would be monsoon, and we'd have a lot of water. And the ground where we were anyway, I think probably the whole country, was decomposed granite. And when it was dry, the vehicle run down the road and dust would fly 20, 30 feet in the air. But when it was raining, that roadbed would turn to a slick, just like ice. It was difficult to keep a vehicle on the road. Another interesting, we did have a Korean civilian, a young boy, I guess he was about 12, who was our houseboy. And we would give him a few dollars now and then. I think we paid him in Korean won. But he was a real sweet guy, real nice kid. And he would wash our clothes and sweep the tents out every day. We had wooden floors we built, being engineers. We had wooden floors in our tents. And he would keep all that stuff straight. And one of the things that I remember, he asked me one time if I could get him a jacket for his dad. So I wrote home to my mother and asked her if she could get a jacket, and she sent a leather jacket over that would fit my dad, and he wanted that thing for his father who lived down in Seoul. He was tickled to death to get that. Another time we got him a pair of boots out of our supply building, and I think he probably took them down to his folks too. When we call him Scotch. His name was Chung Young Uk. Scotia means small because he was just a little kid, and he was real. I liked him, and he was close to me too. But when I got there, he was pretty much under the tutelage or arm of two West Point officers, Lieutenant O'Sullivan and Carlson. And O'Sullivan left before Carlson did, but I remember the day when Carlson left that he kind of promised that kid that he was going to get him to the United States, and I never could figure out exactly how he was going to do that. But I left later on and lost track of where the kid went. But Carlson got him to the States. I think his mother, who lived in Reno, Nevada, made some kind of a connection through her church and brought him over there, and she adopted that kid and got him educated. And then last I heard, he was married and in the wholesale liquor business. And he called me one time. I talked to him some years ago, but tried to get in touch with him within the last year, and I didn't get any response from him. So I'm not real sure what happened to him.
Can you tell me some other stories about your time in the Army in Korea?
Several interesting stories about my time in Korea. First one was about the 35 millimeter camera and how I acquired it, but that was in an earlier piece of the discussion. But we had two groups of Korean nationals that were attached to either our battalion or to the division. One was the ROK Army soldiers. We had probably 20 or 30 of them attached to our battalion. But there were several hundred civilian workers. They call them KSCs, Korean Service Corps people, and they were mainly laborers, and they were all over the division area. And one of our officers, John Carlson, was responsible to pay the KSCs, and when he rotated home to the States, it became my lot to get their pay to them. And they were paid in Korean money, in won, which at the time was about 480 won to the dollar, as I remember. And the first time that I went to pay a group of these people in the outpost, I think there was about 100 of them, way out in the boondocks. We had to go through the territory, didn't have any roads and everything else to get to them. But I was riding in a Jeep with a driver, and we had a guard with a rifle. And we had a Jeep trailer behind us, and that trailer was full, just packed full of Korean money. It took that many Korean dollars, won, to pay these people off. So we got up there in the boondocks, and I didn't pay them off myself physically, but I had a pay guy with me, and he would take a wad of these wands and he would twist it a certain way, and then he was able to take his thumb and flip right out the number of dollars for each one of them, one at a time, which took a long time to pay them, but that was an experience for me, and I'm sure for them. Another happening was after the truce was signed, the division decided they were going to have a command inspection, which is an inspection of all the people and their personal equipment and their quarters and all the military equipment. And me having the motor pool at the time, we had the vehicles all cleaned. We even picked them up and steam cleaned the underside of them, so they were pretty good shape, cleanly-wise anyway, for the muddy atmosphere in which they were in. And the situation was that the drivers were supposed to have their tools in front of their vehicle that they drove, and they were supposed to be standing there beside the tools in front of the vehicle when the inspection officer came by. Well, they had a similar arrangement. They were required to stand by their bunk up there in their tent quarters, and something happened that the inspecting officers, which were different people, were in two places at the same time. We had a group up there at their quarters, and we had a group in the motor pool. And the drivers weren't able to leave their tent. In the early morning, they were required to stay there. So we had an inspection of the motor pool without the drivers, without the tools being laid out in front of their vehicles. Well, needless to say, the inspection officer and our battalion commander were unhappy campers with that deal. And after the inspection was over, I remember the colonel came, I ran into him, and he said, Maney, Lieutenant Maney, he said, Lieutenant Maney, he said, how come the drivers and their tools weren't in place there this morning? And I said, Colonel, I really can't tell you the answer to that right now. I said, the last thing we told them last night at 11 o'clock before we released them to go back to their quarters was that they need to be there with their tools. And he looked at me, he looked down at me. I'm 6'2" plus, and he was about 6'5", I think. He said, well, Lieutenant, he says, what you did was 10% of it. The other 90% of it is getting it done. And I said, whoops, to myself. Another story where it was involved two stories about latrines. One, we had an enlisted man, a private who was not too swift, who was responsible for what we call burning out the latrines, and which was taking a soda or a beer can full of kerosene and pouring it in each of the holes of the outdoor latrines, and then setting the fire in there so that it would burn off the odors and bugs and so forth. Well, this little guy always walked around with a cigar in his mouth, got up there and we had a latrine we called the officer's latrine. It was a two-holer outside of our quarters. And this guy had in mind he was going to do his duty on the officer's latrine. So he went in and he sat down on one hole, poured the kerosene down and lit it on the other hole, and he ended up in the MASH hospital real quick. The other latrine story is that several times while I was there, I was an officer of the guard for the 24-hour period, and which required to be responsible for the guards who were on overnight perimeter duty, and required the officer of the day, which I was this particular time, to go and check all the sentries sometime during midnight and daybreak. And so I used to get somebody to wake me up about 2 o'clock, and I would go out and do the checking. Well, I was making my rounds and went through the motor pool area, or supply area next to the motor pool area, and all of a sudden I'm laying on my back in the bottom of a 6-foot hole that's about 2 feet wide and 4 feet long. So this was a new latrine that was being not used yet, but it wasn't barricaded off anyway. And as I was making my way through the dark to check a sentry, I ended up in the bottom of this latrine. I had to work my way up with my back and my arms and my feet on my arms on one side of the hole, and my feet on the other. So when you're in this kind of situation, all kinds of things, unusual things will happen occasionally, and all part of life.
As you look back on it, how do you feel about your service in Korea?
We were ready to come home. We were lined up in formation at the docks in Incheon, and the president of South Korea at the time, Syngman Rhee, came to address us. And he was complimentary on the fact that we were there and what we had done, but he chastised us pretty severely because he says we were leaving with the job half done. He, of course, was interested in getting all of Korea to be unified again, and that wasn't the case. There was a lot of fanfare that went on while we were there after the truce was signed. They had a number of USO shows, and Marilyn Monroe came over there in one of them when she was married to the Yankee Clipper, and she put on a nice show for us, and these kind of things made us feel important. And then when we got back to the States at Tacoma, at the port of Tacoma on the docks there was a pretty fancy welcoming committee there for us, which made us feel pretty good. And I can remember when we left Fort Lewis to come to our personal homes, I sat on the bus going to the airport next to a young woman, and she asked me what I did, and it was pretty difficult to explain to her, but I do remember telling her that I thought that I felt it was a good idea if every American could have maybe not the experience that we had, but be able to visit the country that we were in and be able to see how things went on over there. Now, at this point, I was 2 years older, 24 years old, so that was 10% increase in my age at the time that I was over there. And I felt like it really matured us to a considerable degree. There was a lot of casualties in the Korean War. Nearly 10% of the Korean population was killed during the war, more in the north than in the south. I think there was something like 120,000 UN soldiers wounded or killed. There was a man killed in the Korean War in 3 years as in the Vietnam War, which was a little bit later and lasted 20 years. Most of us felt while we were there and after we came back that the only people who were concerned about us and what was going on over there were us and our immediate families and maybe a few politicians. But I think what the United States did was important. Harry Truman was president who made the decision to stop the communist aggression from the North. And the North Koreans were being backed by the Chinese. And when that war first started, the communists, North Koreans and the Chinese pushed all of our troops all the way down to Busan and the Sea of Japan, I think it was. And then during the war, the UN troops forced the Chinese all the way back up through North Korea, across the Yalu, and they pushed them on. They mounted forces with the Chinese and pushed the UN troops all the way back down to Busan again, and then we came back to the 38th parallel. And the demilitarized zone was set up when the truce was signed in July of 1953. I came home in 1954, and that line is in the identical same place today as it was in 1953 and 54. I think it's important that nations like us, who have the resources to step in and do some of these things. And I'm proud to have been a part of it. I feel what we did was important. I was introduced to the Korean War National Museum through the efforts of my daughter, and through her involvement in the American Ireland Fund, where she met Dennis Healy. Dennis is the chairman of the KWNM effort and is himself a Korean War veteran. Now that I'm 82 and have 6 grandchildren averaging 18, I know that these kids in our future, I never take for granted the role that we play in mentoring them. One of my grandsons has joined in this effort with me, and he plans to make a career in the military. He says the decision to serve our country has been impacted by the many discussions we've had over the years about my military service. I think our generation needs to understand what went on in the past and what happened to us so that they can make good decisions in the future of this country.